Quest of the Warrior Maiden by Linda C. McCabe. Chapter 3. "No!" Ruggiero roared. "Leave her to me!" He slammed on his helmet, drew out his sword, and waved it at 3 Muslim soldiers threatening Bradamante. Anger coursed through him as he charged after her attackers, when another knight's horse blocked him. "Stop, Ruggiero! That is Montesino!" The words hung in the air as Ruggiero glared at the person in front of him. The rage in his eyes prevented him from immediately recognizing his friend Danafort. "He hurt her," said Ruggiero. "She killed his brother." "In battle." "Yes, and we are at war with the Christians," said Danafort. "The fight is over for the day," said Ruggiero. "She was with me. He should not have attacked her." Bradamante used this time to recover. She had fallen forward onto her horse's neck. Spitting his mane out of her mouth, she sat up in the saddle and touched the back of her head. Warm blood slicked her hair. She grabbed a pennant from a discarded spear stuck in the ground, pulled up her hair, and wrapped the banner loosely around her head to absorb blood, and replaced her helmet. Montesino was my attacker. I know that bastard. He will die for this. Fury gave her newfound vigor. Raising her shield, she drew her sword and assessed her surroundings. More knights bellowed as they charged up the small hill in response to Montesino's call about a straggling Christian. Amid the chaos, a knight attacked Ruggiero from behind by landing a 2-handed blow upon his helmet. "No!" yelled Bradamante as she sprang to his defense. With a single stroke of her sword, she sent the villain's head soaring across the field. Ruggiero, momentarily dazed, was almost hit by the headless body as it fell forward. His horse jumped abruptly to avoid tripping on the corpse. Ruggiero turned around and locked eyes briefly with Bradamante. He gave her a nod, acknowledging her aid, before he resumed his fighting. Bradamante was now surrounded by enemies and began striking down man after man with her sword. There was no time to parry or thrust. Slashing her blade through their necks, slicing open their chests, she quickly winnowed down their numbers. Ruggiero killed her attackers as well. Soon the ground was soaked with blood and littered with freshly dead bodies and severed limbs. As the melee brought more men, she lost sight of Ruggiero. Bradamante then saw a soldier with a red shield bearing a griffin's neck, head, and claws. She knew that design belonged to Montesino and had been watching for it. He smiled at her before turning his back and riding over the crest of a hill. She wanted to follow him, but 3 warriors stood in her way. After dispatching them, she left in the direction she saw Montesino go. Bradamante was unconcerned that he might be luring her into an ambush. She wanted revenge. Riding down the back side of the ridge, she came upon a small wood. Hearing movement within, she urged her horse forward. The dense fog made it difficult to see, making the uneven ground treacherous. Before long, Erebus stepped into an animal hole near a dry creek bed and tumbled onto the ground, throwing Bradamante off his back. The horse tried standing, but crumpled with a loud whinny. Bradamante rolled onto her back. The pain was excruciating. She struggled to breathe. The sound of a twig snapping nearby reminded her Martesino was near. She froze and listened as her enemy walked toward her on foot. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw him stop, bend over, and pick up something. The sound of a sword being sheathed was followed by a whoosh. Inwardly, Bradamante cursed her enemy for daring to touch her beloved sword. I must remain still. Martesino renewed walking, but stopped a few feet away from her. She held her breath and kept her eyes wide open, taking care not to blink. He stepped forward, his boot connecting solidly with her ribs. She remained motionless, feigning death, and refused to allow any sound to escape her lips, even though inwardly she screamed with pain. Satisfied she was dead, he chuckled before uttering something in Arabic. Then he leaned downward and lifted Bradamante's sword in the air, intent on chopping off her head. At the last moment, she sprang to life, reaching upward, and plunged a dagger deep into his throat. Martesino staggered around, struggling to remove the weapon lodged in his windpipe, and then fell onto his back. His death was marked by a gurgling sound as his lungs filled with blood. Bradamante watched a large pool of blood form under his neck. Once she was assured her enemy was dead and not merely wounded, she stepped toward him. Wrenching her dagger free, she wiped the blade clean on the man's leggings. "This also belongs to me," she said as she picked up her sword from the ground nearby. The crisis had passed. It was then her head throbbed. Her arms, shoulders, and back ached from swinging a sword all day. Every step she took brought a new symphony of pain. The image of taking a hot bath, eating a warm meal, and sleeping in a soft bed floated before her eyes. They were as likely that night as flying to the moon. "Ruggiero," she said. "I must find Ruggiero." Her wounds needed tending. She knew he would see to them. Or, if death should claim her, Ruggiero would see she was buried properly. No longer did she yearn to be with Charlemagne's army. If she were to die that night, she wanted to die by Ruggiero's side. At the least, she wanted to gaze upon his face one more time. Each step became more difficult for her as she grew progressively weaker. Bradamante knelt next to Aramis, assessing his injuries. The horse whimpered as she touched his mangled front leg. Tears filled her eyes while she stroked his head. "I am sorry, Aramis. I promised my brother I would take good care of you, and I failed." Tears ran down her cheeks. "Your suffering will be over soon." Bradamante stood on Aramis's right side. Her hands trembled as she drew her sword across the horse's throat. releasing a torrent of blood. The horse convulsed before slumping to the ground, lifeless. She used Marchesino's leggings again to wipe her sword clean of blood. She then sat down, rested her head on her knees, and sobbed. Never before had she taken an animal's life. Killing men in battle was easy compared to killing animals. Erebus had trusted her, yet he died because she wanted revenge. "You cannot stay here," she said to herself. She wiped away tears as she fought to regain her composure. "Nor can you die next to that infidel." She retrieved some bare provisions from the saddlebags and headed for the woods. Listening for sounds while walking through the fog, she closed her eyes and concentrated on the soft munching of a horse eating grass. Following those sounds, she made her way to Marchesino's horse tied to a tree. She stashed her meager stores into its bags, untied the horse, and mounted it. Wrapping the reins around her forearms, she steadied herself in the saddle and slung her shield on her back. Fatigue was claiming her. Her eyelids were getting heavier, but she struggled against resting. She needed to find Ruggiero. The dense fog made it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Bradamante no longer knew which direction to go to find her way back to him. "Ruggiero," she mumbled before passing out. The horse continued walking steadily into the night without guidance from its rider, as if responding to an invisible hand. If you enjoyed this presentation, I invite you to discover my novels, Quest of the Warrior Maiden and Fate of the Saracen Knight. They are available in both ebook and trade paperback. Signed copies are available from the wonderful independent bookstore Kazoo Books in Kalamazoo, Michigan. You can find them online at kazoobooks.com. You can also visit my website at www.lindacmccabe.com or at questofthewarriormaiden.com and join my mailing list. The music is Ruggiero by Gaspar Sans and played by Giacomo Fiore.